In August 1943, inside a sweltering military hospital in Sicily, the most famous general in the American army walked up to a trembling, unarmed soldier and struck him across the face. Then he pulled out his pistol, waved it at the man's head, and screamed that he should be lined up and shot. 1 week later, he did it again, to a different soldier, in front of dozens of witnesses. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. This wasn't some random outburst by a nobody officer. This was General George S. Patton, the man who would later lead the charge across Europe, the general Hitler feared most, the warrior who millions believed would win the war. And in those 2 moments, he nearly threw it all away. He nearly got court-martialed. He nearly got those soldiers killed. And he nearly cost the Allies their most aggressive, unstoppable commander right before the most important invasion in human history. This is the true story of the Patton Slapping Incidents, and I promise you, it's so much darker and stranger than anything you've heard before. If you're into deep dives on history's wildest moments, hit that like button and subscribe because we're going deep today. Let me start with something most people don't realize. George Patton wasn't just famous in 1943, he was a legend. Not movie famous, actual living legend famous. Soldiers whispered his name like he was some kind of war god. Enemies genuinely feared him. He'd led American forces to victory in North Africa, crushing Rommel's Afrika Korps when everyone said it couldn't be done. He moved faster than any general alive, hit harder, took more risks, and somehow always came out on top. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Patton wasn't just fearless. He was terrifying. Not to the enemy, to his own men. Patton believed in one thing above all else: courage. Not kindness, not strategy, not even victory really. Courage. Old-fashioned, charge into gunfire, never back down courage. He thought war was a test of manhood, a sacred ritual, where the strong survived and the weak deserved whatever happened to them. And if you couldn't handle the heat, the blood, the screaming chaos of battle, then you were worse than the enemy. You were a coward. And Patton hated cowards more than he hated Hitler. This is important to understand because it explains everything that happened next. Patton grew up in a wealthy California family obsessed with military history. His childhood heroes were ancient warriors, Civil War generals, medieval knights. He literally believed he'd been a soldier in past lives. I'm not making this up. Patton thought he'd fought at Troy, marched with Caesar, charged with Napoleon. He saw himself as part of an eternal brotherhood of warriors, and modern war was just the latest chapter in his soul's endless battle. He was 57 years old in 1943, and he'd spent his entire life preparing for this war. He studied, he trained, he pushed himself until his body broke and then pushed harder. And when World War II finally came, he was ready, more than ready. He was born for this, but there was a problem. Actually, there were several problems with George Patton, and they were about to explode in the worst possible way. By August 1943, the Allies had invaded Sicily. Operation Husky, they called it. The goal was simple: kick the Germans and Italians off the island, control the Mediterranean, and use Sicily as a launching pad for the invasion of mainland Italy. Patton commanded the 7th Army, and he attacked like a man possessed. His forces moved so fast that British General Bernard Montgomery, who was supposed to be leading the charge, got left in the dust. Patton didn't just want to win. He wanted to win first, win biggest, win so completely that nobody could ever question his genius again. But here's what happens when you push an army that hard, that fast. In the middle of a Sicilian summer, people break. The heat was unbearable, over 100 degrees most days. Men were collapsing from heat stroke. Malaria was spreading through the ranks like wildfire. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters. Face-to-face killing in villages and mountains, where every corner could hide a machine gun nest. And the psychological toll? Nobody was talking about it, but it was destroying soldiers by the hundreds. They called it shell shock in World War I. By World War II, they were calling it combat fatigue or battle exhaustion. Today, we call it PTSD, and we understand that it's a real physical brain injury caused by prolonged exposure to life-threatening trauma. But in 1943, most commanders, especially old-school warriors like Patton, saw it as weakness, character failure, cowardice dressed up in medical language. So when Patton started visiting field hospitals in Sicily, seeing beds filled with men who had no visible wounds, no blood, no missing limbs, just 1,000-yard stares and shaking hands, he didn't see trauma victims. He saw deserters, quitters, men who were stealing beds from the real wounded. the soldiers who'd taken bullets and shrapnel and kept fighting. And that's when everything went wrong. August 3rd, 1943. The 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. It's brutally hot. The kind of heat that makes your uniform stick to your skin and turns every breath into work. General Patton walks into the hospital tent and immediately you can see he's in a mood. His jaw is clenched. His famous ivory-handled pistols are gleaming on his hips. He's there to visit the wounded, to boost morale, to play the part of the fearless commander who cares about his men. And for a while it goes fine. He talks to soldiers with bandages and casts, tells them they're heroes, promises them they'll be back in action soon. Then he gets to Private Charles H. Cool is sitting on a box near the receiving tent. He's 26 years old, been in combat for weeks, and he looks exhausted. Not wounded, exhausted. Patton stops in front of him and asks what any general would ask. What's the matter with you? And Cool, probably too tired to think about how badly this could go, tells the truth. I guess I just can't take it, sir. 5 words. That's all it took. Patton's face goes red. You can see the rage building, and everyone in that tent knows what's coming, but nobody can stop it. Patton leans in close, and his voice drops to this cold, venomous hiss. You're a disgrace. You're sitting here like a coward while brave men are dying. Then he slaps him, hard, across the face with his gloved hand. The tent goes silent. Medical staff freeze. Other patients stare in disbelief. And Patton isn't done. He grabs Cool by the collar, physically drags him toward the tent entrance, and shouts that this man shouldn't be here, that he's faking, that he should be sent back to the front immediately. Some accounts say Patton actually kicked him. Others say he threatened to shoot him right there. What we know for certain is that he called Cool a coward multiple times, in front of dozens of witnesses, and physically assaulted a soldier who was suffering from psychological trauma. The medical staff are horrified. A couple of officers try to calm Patton down, but he's past listening. He storms out of the tent, gets in his jeep, and drives away. And here's what's so chilling about this moment. Patton thinks he did the right thing. In his mind, he just gave a weak soldier the wake-up call he needed. He probably thought Cool would thank him someday. But that's not what happened. Word spreads immediately. Nurses who witnessed the incident are shaken. Doctors file informal complaints. Officers talk quietly among themselves, trying to figure out what to do. Because here's the problem. Patton is a 3-star general, one of the most powerful men in the European theatre. You don't just report a guy like that for slapping a private. It could end your career. It could get you transferred to some nightmare posting in the Pacific. So most people stay quiet, at least officially. But the story leaks. It always does. And within days, whispers of what Patton did are spreading through the ranks. But here's the thing. If it had ended there, maybe Patton could have survived it. Maybe Eisenhower never hears about it, or hears a watered-down version, or decides to let it slide because the Sicily campaign is going so well. Maybe this becomes just another Patton story, the kind of thing soldiers talk about over drinks, and then forget. But it didn't end there. 1 week later, August 10th, 1943, Patton walks into another hospital. This time, it's the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, and if anything, he's in an even worse mood than before. The fighting is getting tougher. American casualties are climbing, and Patton is obsessed with pushing forward, crushing the enemy, proving he's the greatest general alive. He has no patience for weakness, no sympathy for excuses. He's making his rounds, talking to wounded men, when he comes to a soldier sitting on a stool with his head in his hands. Private Paul G. Bennett. He's 21 years old. He's been in combat for 4 months straight, and he's completely falling apart. Patton asks him the same question he asked Cool. What's wrong with you? Bennett looks up, and there are tears in his eyes. It's my nerves, sir. I can't stand the shelling anymore. And Patton just loses it. He doesn't just slap Bennett once. He hits him multiple times, so hard that Bennett's helmet liner flies off and clatters across the floor. Patton is screaming at him, calling him a coward, saying he's a disgrace to the army. Then, and this is the part that almost nobody talks about, Patton pulls out his pistol, one of those famous ivory-handled revolvers, and he waves it in Bennett's face, shouting that he should be taken outside and shot for cowardice in the face of the enemy. Let that sink in for a second. A 3-star American general just threatened to execute one of his own soldiers for having PTSD. The medical staff are stunned. One witness, Colonel Donald Currier, the hospital commander, physically steps between Patton and Bennett. Other officers move in, trying to defuse the situation. And this time, Patton doesn't just storm out. He turns to the medical staff and orders them to send Bennett back to the front immediately. Not in a week, not after treatment. Now. He wants this coward back in combat. Eventually, they calm Patton down enough to get him out of the tent. Bennett is left sitting there, shaking, humiliated, traumatized all over again. And this time, the medical staff don't stay quiet. Colonel Currier writes a formal report. So do several nurses and doctors. They document everything. The slapping, the threats, the brandished weapon, the order to return a psychologically broken man to combat. And these reports go up the chain of command, fast. Within days, the story reaches Eisenhower's headquarters in Algiers. Now here's where this story gets really interesting, because what happens next decides the entire future of World War II. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, is sitting in his office reading these reports, and he's facing an impossible choice. On one hand, Patton just committed what amounts to assault and possibly violated military law. He humiliated wounded soldiers, threatened them with execution, and created a massive morale problem in the middle of an active campaign. There are witnesses, there's documentation. By every military regulation in the book, Patton should face a court-martial. But on the other hand, Patton is winning. His 7th Army is tearing through Sicily. The Germans are retreating. The invasion timeline is ahead of schedule. And more importantly, Eisenhower knows something that most people in 1943 don't know yet. The Allies are planning to invade France. D-Day is coming. And for that invasion to succeed, they need aggressive, fearless commanders who can push deep into enemy territory and keep pushing no matter what. Commanders exactly like George Patton, so Eisenhower makes a calculated decision. He's not going to court-martial Patton. He's not going to relieve him of command, but he's also not going to let this slide. He sends for Patton, orders him to fly to Algiers immediately. And when Patton walks into Eisenhower's office, probably expecting to be congratulated on his Sicily victories, Eisenhower hands him the reports and says, "Read these. We don't know every word of that conversation, but we know the basics from Eisenhower's letters and Patton's diary." Eisenhower tells Patton that he's indispensable, that the army needs him, that his military genius is crucial to winning the war. But then he says something that shakes Patton to his core. "If this ever happens again, if you ever lay hands on another soldier, your career is over. I will relieve you of command and send you home in disgrace." Then comes the punishment. And it's brilliant, really, because Eisenhower understands exactly how to hurt a man like Patton. He doesn't take away his rank. He doesn't demote him. Instead, he orders Patton to personally apologize to every soldier he struck, to every medical officer who witnessed it, to the entire medical staff of both hospitals in person, face to face. For George Patton, warrior incarnate, living legend, man who sees himself as a reincarnated conqueror, this is worse than any court-martial. Over the next several weeks, Patton travels across Sicily, hospital to hospital, apologizing. And these aren't quick, insincere, sorry about that moments. Eisenhower made sure of it. Patton has to stand in front of entire hospital staffs and admit he was wrong. He has to shake hands with soldiers he assaulted and ask for their forgiveness. Some of them refuse. Private Cool, the first soldier Patton hit, reportedly looked him in the eye and just turned away. No handshake, no acceptance, just cold silence. Other soldiers shake his hand, but you can see they don't mean it. They're doing it because a general is standing in front of them, and they have no choice. The nurses who witnessed everything watch with barely concealed contempt. Some accounts say Patton actually cried during one of these apologies, overcome with shame and humiliation. And here's the thing, Patton genuinely seems to have been shocked by the reaction. In his mind, he'd been tough on soldiers who needed toughening up. He'd enforced discipline in a time of war. He couldn't understand why everyone was so upset. But as he went through this forced apology tour, something seemed to click. Maybe not full understanding, but at least recognition that he'd crossed a line. Meanwhile, back in America, reporters are starting to hear about the incidents. War correspondents in Sicily picked up the story, and by September 1943, several major newspapers know what happened. But here's where it gets really complicated. Eisenhower personally asks them not to publish. He argues that revealing Patton's actions will damage Allied morale, give ammunition to Nazi propagandists, and potentially compromise future operations. Most reporters agree to hold the story, at least for a while. But in November 1943, the story breaks. Journalist Drew Pearson goes public with detailed accounts of both slapping incidents on his radio show. The American public is shocked, outraged. Congressmen demand Patton be court-martialed or discharged. Veterans groups call for his head. The War Department is flooded with angry letters. And for a few weeks, it genuinely looks like Patton's career is over. Eisenhower releases a carefully worded statement defending Patton's military value while acknowledging his errors in judgment. Behind the scenes, he's lobbying hard to keep Patton in the army, arguing to Washington that they'll need him for the invasion of France. And slowly, carefully, the scandal starts to fade. Not because people forgive Patton, but because the war is still raging and there are bigger concerns than one general's temper tantrum. But Eisenhower still has a problem. Patton is too controversial to give a major command right away. The public is watching. Congress is watching. So Eisenhower comes up with a solution that's either brilliant or insane, depending on how you look at it. He sidelines Patton by giving him a fake army. Let me explain exactly what happened here, because this is one of the wildest parts of the whole story. In early 1944, the Allies are planning Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. But they need the Germans to think the invasion is coming somewhere else. So they create an elaborate deception plan called Operation Fortitude, designed to convince Hitler that the main Allied invasion force will land at Pas-de-Calais, the closest point between England and France. To sell this lie, they need to create a fake army, a phantom invasion force that looks real to German intelligence. So they invent the first United States Army group, FUSAG, complete with fake radio traffic, dummy tanks made of inflatable rubber, and false reports fed to German spies. And who do they put in command of this non-existent army? George S. Patton. Think about the genius of this move. The Germans know Patton. They respect him. They fear him. German intelligence has files on every major Allied commander, and Patton is at the top of their list as the most aggressive, most dangerous general the Americans have. So when German reconnaissance planes photograph tank formations in southeastern England, and German radio intercepts pick up signals from Patton's army group, and captured double agents report that Patton is preparing for the real invasion at Calais, the Germans believe it. They believe it so completely that they keep an entire army, 22 divisions, sitting at Calais waiting for Patton to attack. Even after the Allies land at Normandy on June 6, 1944, Hitler is convinced it's a diversion. He thinks Patton is still coming, still preparing to launch the main invasion at Calais with his massive army group. And those 22 German divisions stay put, waiting for an attack that will never come, while the real Allied forces fight their way off the Normandy beaches. Patton's fake command, his punishment posting, his exile from real combat, becomes one of the most successful military deceptions in history. The man who nearly got court-martialed for slapping 2 soldiers ends up helping to save thousands of Allied lives without firing a single shot. But Patton is going insane with frustration. He's stuck in England, commanding rubber tanks, giving fake orders, pretending to prepare for an invasion he'll never lead. He writes in his diary that he feels useless, humiliated, forgotten. He watches D-Day happen without him and wonders if he'll ever get back into the fight. Then, in late July 1944, Eisenhower finally gives him a real command again. The Third Army, freshly arrived in France, ready to break out from the Normandy beachhead and drive into the heart of German-occupied Europe. And Patton shows everyone exactly why Eisenhower fought so hard to keep him. From August 1st through September 1944, Patton's Third Army advances over 600 miles in just 1 month. They liberate thousands of square miles of French territory. They destroy multiple German divisions. They move so fast that German commanders can't figure out where Patton's forces will strike next. His tanks roll through towns before the Germans even know they're coming. Supply lines struggle to keep up. Maps become obsolete overnight because Patton's already 50 miles beyond where he was supposed to be. This is the advance that makes Patton a legend. This is what Americans remember when they think of him. The fearless general racing across Europe, pistols on his hips, leading from the front, unstoppable and brilliant, and absolutely terrifying to face in battle. German generals admit after the war that Patton was the Allied commander they feared most, the one they couldn't predict, couldn't trap, couldn't slow down. But here's what nobody forgets either, those 2 slaps. Private Charles Cool and Private Paul Bennett, 2 young men who went to war, broke under the impossible strain of combat, and got assaulted by their own commanding general for having the audacity to be human. So what happened to them? Private Cool returned to duty after treatment and survived the war. He later said he forgave Patton, that he understood the general was under enormous pressure. Private Bennett also returned to combat and made it home alive. In later interviews, Bennett was less forgiving. He acknowledged Patton's military genius, but said he never forgot the humiliation, the fear, the feeling of having a loaded pistol waved in his face by the man who was supposed to protect him. And Patton. He led the Third Army all the way across France, through the Battle of the Bulge, into Germany itself. He was there when the Allies discovered the concentration camps. He was there when Nazi Germany collapsed. He became exactly what he always wanted to be. A legendary warrior, a conqueror, a general whose name would be remembered for generations. But the slapping incidents followed him everywhere. When he died in a car accident in December 1945, just months after the war ended, every obituary mentioned them. Every biography includes them. Every film about him shows them. They're as much a part of his legacy as his tactical genius or his famous speeches. So here's the question that really matters. Was Eisenhower right to keep him? Think about what we know. Those 22 German divisions sitting at Calais during D-Day, waiting for Patton's fake army. They could have been at Normandy. They could have pushed the Allies back into the sea. The invasion could have failed. The Third Army's rapid advance through France. That shortened the war. That saved lives. Every day Patton's forces drove deeper into Germany was one day fewer that cities were bombed, that concentration camps operated, that people died. But also think about this. Patton struck traumatized soldiers. He threatened to execute them. He created an environment where seeking help for psychological wounds was seen as weakness, where soldiers suffered in silence rather than risk being called cowards. How many men in Patton's command suffered treatable combat fatigue but refused medical care because they'd heard what happened to Cool and Bennett? How many pushed themselves past their breaking point and never recovered? How many came home with untreated PTSD that destroyed their lives because they learned in Sicily that admitting you're struggling means you're a disgrace? There's no easy answer here. Patton helped win the war. That's undeniable. His military genius, his aggressive tactics, his ability to inspire and terrify in equal measure, those things mattered. They saved lives. They shortened the war. They helped defeat Nazi Germany. But he also hurt his own soldiers. He weaponized shame and humiliation. He treated psychological trauma as moral failure. And he got away with it because he was too valuable to lose. The truth is, George Patton was both things at once. He was the brilliant general and the cruel commander. He was the warrior who helped save Europe and the man who couldn't save himself from his own rage. He understood ancient battle tactics, but couldn't understand basic human psychology. He could plan the movement of 300,000 men across a continent, but couldn't control his temper long enough to avoid assaulting wounded soldiers. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We want our heroes to be simple. We want the generals who win wars to be pure and good. Or we want them to be obviously evil, so we can condemn them without guilt. But real people are complicated. Real heroes have flaws. Real villains have virtues. And sometimes the same person who does something monstrous in a hospital tent can also do something heroic on a battlefield. The slapping incidents happened because Patton believed weakness was unforgivable. But his own weakness, his inability to control his temper, his failure to understand human psychology, nearly cost the Allies one of their best generals. The thing he hated most in others was the thing that almost destroyed him. There's a recording of Patton speaking to his troops before they shipped out to Europe. His voice is higher than you'd expect, almost nasal, but there's steel underneath it. He tells them, "No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country." It's classic Patton, aggressive and crude and somehow inspiring. But listening to it now, knowing what we know, you hear something else. You hear a man who sees war as simple. Kill or be killed. Win or lose, strong or weak, but war isn't simple. People aren't simple, and courage isn't the opposite of fear. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is admit he's breaking and ask for help. Sometimes strength means recognizing your limits. Sometimes the real coward is the man who can't face his own humanity. Charles Cool and Paul Bennett were brave enough to go to war, brave enough to face death day after day, and when their minds and bodies finally said, "No more," they were brave enough to admit it. That took courage. More courage in some ways than charging into battle. Because admitting you're hurt, admitting you need help, admitting you're human, that's terrifying in a way that bullets and bombs aren't. Patton never understood that, or if he did, he never admitted it. He died believing he was right. that toughness was everything, that the only virtue that mattered in war was the refusal to quit no matter what. And maybe he had to believe that. Maybe you can't be George Patton without believing you're harder than everyone else, tougher than fear, stronger than trauma. Maybe the same mindset that made him a great general made it impossible for him to show mercy to men who couldn't match his inhuman standard. But here's what I think really happened in those hospital tents in Sicily. I think Patton looked at those two young soldiers and saw something that terrified him. Not weakness, recognition. I think he saw men who were exactly where he would never let himself be. Men who admitted they were breaking when Patton had spent his entire life refusing to break. Men who asked for help when Patton would rather die than ask. And that scared him more than any German army, so he lashed out. He hit them because he couldn't hit the part of himself that was afraid, exhausted, human. He called them cowards because he was terrified of his own fear. He pulled his pistol and threatened to shoot them because some part of him wanted to kill the vulnerability he could never afford to show. That's the tragedy of George Patton. He was exactly what America needed to win that war, but he was also exactly the kind of man who would hurt his own soldiers rather than admit they were suffering from something real. In the end, Eisenhower made the right choice for the war effort, keeping Patton, sidelining him for D-Day, then unleashing him across France. All of that helped win World War II. But it also sent a message to every soldier in the American army. Your value is measured by your usefulness. Your trauma doesn't matter. Your psychological wounds don't count. Shut up. Keep fighting. And if you can't take it anymore, don't expect sympathy from the men in charge. That message echoed for decades. Korean War veterans with PTSD were told to toughen up. Vietnam veterans came home broken and were called cowards. Even today, even with all our understanding of psychological trauma, soldiers are afraid to admit they're struggling because somewhere in the back of their minds is the ghost of George Patton, telling them that asking for help is weakness. So yeah, Patton helped win the war, but he also helped create a culture that killed people long after the shooting stopped. And that's his real legacy. Not just the victories, not just the slaps, both things together. The hero and the monster, the genius and the bully, the man who saved thousands of lives and destroyed two soldiers just for admitting they were human. The day George Patton slapped those two soldiers, he almost lost everything. His command, his reputation, his chance to make history, and in a way, maybe he should have lost it all. Maybe the right choice would have been to court-martial him, to send a message that no matter how valuable you are, no matter how much we need you, you don't get to abuse people. But wars aren't won with moral clarity. They're won with flawed people making impossible choices. And sometimes the cost of victory is knowing that the heroes who saved you are the same people who would have destroyed you if you'd shown weakness at the wrong moment. That's the truth about George Patton. That's the truth about August 1943 in Sicily. And that's the truth about war itself. It needs monsters to win, and then we spend the rest of history trying to figure out whether the monster was worth it.